Hello, hello, hello. I've missed you missing me. We're back here for another go at it. Another new round of changing the world, making everything a better place. It's time to crack the old knuckles, roll up the sleeves. Not too much, just a little bit. Take a go at it. It is, what is it? It's July 20, 2020. 2020. Hotter than a photo negative of a vampire's demeanor. It's in the 90s here in Brooklyn, quite warm. We are on to, we're in the L's. I want to say I'm surprised with the level of success that I had, but I'm not. I'm modestly surprised, but I thought I would get about 95% right of these questions that are unanswerable. I'm, if I've counted right, I'm like 108 for 108. I'm just on a roll. That's like three-pointer after three-pointer after three-pointer. What are you going to do? There is what I'm going to call the missing video. I did a video a few days ago, but little technical difficulties. I'm not sure if I can really recover it. So we're just going to skip past that. I did make some earth-shaking discoveries in that, so eventually I'm going to have to dig that up. But I'm going to wait for the crowds to roar and for the I want a little of this, a little of this, you know, that kind of stuff. Randy Macho Man, Savage kind of stuff. Anyway, as usual, I'm joined here by our good friend, Ellis Dale, and all the voices. What could I do without all the voices? It's the sweetest sound in all of sonoricity. Joined by my hat. And we're just going to kick it off. Let's go here. We have got Mario Livio, who's an astroscientist and author of Why? What Makes Us Curious? And Mario Livio's last question is, will it ever be possible to download the information stored in the human brain? What do you mean by download? What do you mean by information? What do you mean by brain? What do you mean by human? I know Kung Fu. Well, ever is a long time. If we make it past the next 6 months, I would say yes. If we don't, you know. And he's just asking, will it ever? So I can just say, of course. And that's your answer. Well, let's think about this. We have to determine what is the information stored in the human brain. Is it just our what you know, is it that I know that there's a Topeka, Kansas, and that's a city, and I've never been there, but I'm sure it exists as a data point, as a slice of a thing. Is the information also the feeling that I have about my body and how it feels right now, and the fact that I can feel my arms and my legs and everything seems fairly normal. Stomach is a tiny bit uneased. There's just a slight bit of unease there for some reason. Maybe it's something I ate, maybe it isn't. Is it that too? Is it really, I made a joke at the outset about what is information, but there are all these kind of nested hierarchies of information, and what do we even determine the hell is in in the brain. At a certain level, there's got to be, there's something in the brain like a hard drive that's got data that is stored. It isn't stored just stored in some combination of logical and virtual, right? Because, or I would say logical and physical. We've got kind of a dual thing going on there. I think we almost have to, there's a physical place where the information is stored, but the logical representation of it is not the same as the physical space. It's like a hard disk, just in a different way. What would an interface have to be like in order to be able to how do I swipe that data? How do we throw a USB in here? What would we have to do? What would that interface look like? Given the fact that we probably have multiple different systems for long-term memory, short-term memory, that interfaces with our visual systems in probably much more ways that we can know or understand, at least currently. Interfaces with a bunch of different systems. I'm thinking if we do, we're going to have to, at least the way I can conceptualize it, we're going to have like a bunch of different streams of like, we're tapping into neuronal base here and down here by the secular collectus and by here. But the thing is, our brain has all these different inputs and things going on, and it creates a me. But that me is the magic of all of these different inputs and all of the different levels of the sensors, and it's the competition for attentional resources that creates the sense of I. And I don't think there's one place that you could get to the brain that you could just replicate the sense of I. I think that is in some ways kind of probably epiphenomenal, or it's like it's a layer that is the result of processing going on in many sublayers. So what I'm thinking is that we would probably have to have multiple independent systems that took information, or like, we got a feed, like we tapped a phone line, but we tapped a feed from whatever's going on in the visual cortex with whatever's going on in the ear canal, whatever's going on in the other parts of the CNS, it's going on in this, going on in that. And then somehow we try and kind of like recreate I think we'd have to have kind of like a very, very, very unsupervised, or mildly supervised, if there is such a thing, but probably like unsupervised AI program taking all of the feeds as input. Well, I'm going maybe a step too far because he's just saying, can we download the information? Take a bunch of different feeds. We might be able to. I mean, sure, we can label that shit in 5 different places, the visual cortex and blah blah blah. But so I think we could do that, but then we would still need something to kind of put that back together if you want to kind of actually like oh, this is a slice in the life of yours truly or whatever. That would be its own separate project. The yes, we could store information. We would have to, I think, have a bunch of different interfaces because probably the way that the analog digital ones and zeros phonographical differentiated informational pathways, we would have to have different interfaces for those. And then you could probably put one of these or two of them together and say, oh, this is what you're getting from this circuit, and this is what you're getting from this circuit, and this is what you're getting from this circuit. But to put it together and to say, oh, this is what it felt like to be this guy for the last 20 minutes is like a whole nother project. So again, I think this comes down to what are you calling information? It sounds like an easy question, but it just isn't. There's so many different. It's like the brain. Let's see, the brain has got all of these inputs, and it's somehow orchestrating, balancing, and creating a virtual reality out of all these different inputs. So I think the project of tapping into the different inputs is fairly feasible. Reconstructing those inputs into a we'll create a zombie, put a very advanced AI program in it that's taking those inputs and using it as a feed to just understand its view of reality or whatever. That's a whole nother project. And I think that's where you might run into a very basic problem of trying to recreate an analog sense out of digital information. I think there's something in consciousness that's almost for sure analog, and it's the pulse of life, or at least how it manifests itself analog in analog terms. How do you take a bunch of like digital feeds and then manifest them somehow in an analog way where they're all kind of meshing in, but it's not. It's serial parallel, and it's and it's weighted. So Mario Livio, the answer to your last question, will it ever be possible to download the information stored in the human brain, is really depends on what you mean by information. I think we can certainly tap into a bunch of our different systems and get the neuronal responses, and then even have an AI system kind of learn what those responses represent. But to turn that into a feeling of another version of consciousness or something like that, or to have it, this is what it feels like. Which again, I'm not saying that's what you're going for, but if we wanted to do that, you gotta figure out how to get a CD and an album to have sex. You gotta figure that out. So I'm not saying it's not possible or fun. Interesting question. Thank you for that. And yes, the sine wave over a 1 and a 0. The cat is dancing, even if it's dead. Okay. All right, next question. Seth Lloyd, see if this works here. Yes, we got it. I'm getting good at this. Seth Lloyd is a professor of quantum mechanical engineering at MIT. Average field hockey team. And author of Programming the Universe. Seth Lloyd's last question is, how did our complex universe arrive out of simple physical laws? The philosopher in me wants to say, how do you know it's complex? Is it complex if the universe is every possible thing going on at every possible moment, even if I don't even know if a moment even makes sense in this context, but if it's just, the universe is just everything, and what we are is the complexity is just our increased ability to swim through a universe of everything. And comprehend a universe of everything so that we can see more of the fact that everything is going on. And the universe was just always and at all times just everything going on. I don't know. We're aware of the math that we can interact with, that we can touch. But it's all math. It's all of the math at every moment, everywhere, at all times. Is that complex or is that simple? I mean, just as a... I mean, it isn't very satisfying because I want very, very simple give rise to complex. And you at a certain level, the history of the universe kind of makes sense that way. But does it make sense that way because that's the way it is, or does it make sense because that's the story that we're drawing, because we're swimming in an ocean of everything, and we're finding more and more ways to look in that ocean of everything, and it's just everything has always existed at every moment, and we're just navigating through that. I don't really like that. It's just a thought that I've had in my head. I'm much more keen to the idea of something incredibly simple with simple rules gives rise to complexity. And even if we're there has to be some part of that that's true, even if I'm saying everything is we're swimming in infinity. Because even our process of being able to swim more and see more or something, that's something. You're not making it easy on me, Seth Lloyd. I need to nail this. I want to be 109 for 109 on these questions. Well, I'm thinking about it in a world of data or a world of relationships. You could have very, very simple rules, like almost no rules, but if complexity builds out of relationships, then you can get towers of complexity out of a couple rules and a huge and a huge amount of potential relationships. So maybe the key to the whole thing is simple rules, many, many relationships. In the relationships create hierarchies of complexity. And can create other what we'll call laws. Out of a simple, X to Y. And now I'm starting to talk like, Kaufman or something like that. But I don't know, maybe Lee Smolin too. I don't know. If you start with simple laws and you get complexity out of relationships. So what's the fundamental thing? Maybe the fundamental thing is, 2 or 3 laws, but I'm just saying again, it's relationship. So maybe we're complex because there's some relationship between us and Saturn. And if all right. Seth Lloyd, answer your last question. How did our complex universe arise from simple physical laws? The answer to that question is you have to look at the relationships. And I don't know what the hell that means exactly, but viewing the universe in terms, the complexity builds out of more and more relationships to whatever we're going to call whatever that thing is that can have a relationship. Simple laws, add a bunch of relationships, build laws on top of the simple laws, build a nested hierarchy of laws, which builds a hierarchy of relationships. I'm not sure which way to go with that one, but either way, it's viewing the universe in terms of relationships over very simple laws gives us complexity. And I'm going to stop right there because I've answered this question completely, fully, accurately. I'm not going to give you the formula because that's busy work. Anybody can do that. I can put that into Excel. I can put that into PowerPoint. But that's your answer. All right, thank you, Seth Lloyd. 109 for 109. Okay, next question. Jonathan B. Losos, the Monique and Philip Lehner Professor for the study of Latin America, Professor of, oh man, I've got to go back to the website here. There's a lot going on. Jonathan B. Losos, Monique and Philip Lehner Professor for the study of Latin America, Professor of Organismic and Evolutionary Biology at Harvard, and the curator in herpetology, which if I'm got my Latin right, that's the study of herpes and the collection of herpes. Museum of Comparative Zoology and author of Improbable Destinies. That may be the longest title, introduction, I have had yet. I don't think I've had a 3-line one, and that's a heck of a long 2-line one. So, Jonathan B. Losos, your last question is, how will evolution shape the biological world 100 years from now, or 100,000? Well, how will evolution shape the biological world 100 years from now, or 100,000? I keep thinking there's a There's a way to see evolution as actually a branch of economics. Economics writ large is potentially, I don't know what I'm thinking, but I don't know. Go with it. How will evolution shift the biological world? Well, you're talking about our biological world? You're talking about humans? I mean, are we... One could say that we've largely slipped the chains of natural selection with humanity in the last century or so. I mean, we're no longer really constrained by nature red in tooth and claw, at least, you know, and the traditional evolutionary, you know, constraints and, you know, the humans that have access to the most resources aren't having the most children, which in evolutionary terms doesn't even really make any sense. So humans have already we've gotten off that merry-go-round, so to speak. Excuse me. So from a human perspective, I'm going to say you'd have to talk about evolution writ large and not necessarily talking about just genetics. So I think obviously just genetics is a very specific, very species-centric version of evolution. Evolution is occurring in dozens of ways. Because it's economics. The rest of the biota, the rest of the earth, just take 100 years from now. I mean, and 100 years from now, I kind of feel like most of the earth is going to be maybe not 100 years, but at some point is going to be kind of a zoo. Maybe not 100 years, but in a few hundred years, when we're on Mars and we're on the planets and whatever, and, you know, it's going to be a biodiversity habitat that we're trying to maintain and protect. I hope it's like that. $100,000 is will there still be beavers in 100,000 years? Well, what does that depend on? It depends on the ecosystem and evolutionary pressures. Let's say beavers have probably been around for, I don't know, 3 million years. If we don't screw around with the ecosystem of beavers, what to screw around with? Will chimpanzees in 1,000 years screw around with the beavers ecosystem because they've made some kind of leap? We did a We combined Lucy and Mary and freaking got Planet of the Apes, and now and we're like, oh, we don't want to screw with it. They're doing stuff. We can look at our own ancestry through what chimpanzees are doing, and they're gonna screw with the beavers. What is evolution? Evolution is the non-random selection of varying. We'll take it from a gene-centric and a. No, actually, that's not even gene-centric. The non-random selection of randomly varying replicators. Take the Dawkins version of evolution, which is, I like that. I mean, evolution for humans is going to be. I mean, I don't even know if it makes sense to think about biological evolution for humans. At least we're just kind of. Press record. All right, wrap it up because you want to be 110 for 110. For humans, okay. So we're okay. 100 years from now, or maybe 200 or 300 or whatever, biological sex is going to be. Yeah, you guys still do it that way? I mean, however we choose to have progeny or whatever, we will not be constrained um, by by biological procreation. So evolution will not be working on us in that way. So the question really is, what creatures have slipped the bonds of sexual reproduction? So the way to answer it is whatever creatures have managed a way to slip the constraints of sexual reproduction, which humans will be one, and then will no longer be human at that point. I don't know how the historians will conceive of what to call us or what branch on the tree to call us, but I don't think it even makes sense to put us on the, you know, we'll probably just flower and go in a million directions, but you won't. The evolutionary directions that we go in will not be defined genetically. And if evolution is a response to the ecosystem, in some ways, of course it is, fitness landscape, all that stuff, we're going to be creating the ecosystems. And most of our ecosystems are not going to be physical. They're going to be virtual ecosystems. We'll spend most of our lives in virtual systems. So how does evolution work with the virtual worlds that we're creating that don't answer to the constraints of what is the fundamental unit of selection in environments? Is it all freaking memes? Is it that memes all the way down till you get to turtles, and then it turtles all the way down, and memes all the way up? How would evolution act? It's already acting in a way that you could just call information processing. Information processing algorithms that find a way to up and down a fitness landscape. What happens when we're creating the fitness landscape? What happens when the fitness landscape doesn't even matter? What happens when the fitness landscape just becomes a wave and anybody can ride a wave? They can create their own wave and ride their own wave wherever the hell they want to go, and that's your landscape. What would be the fundamental constraints then? Energy, just total energy, access to energy, complexity, how much a part of the system can you occupy in the system? If we become kind of a hive mind type thing or whatever, how much can you be part of a system? So, Jonathan B. Losos, the answer to your last question, which is how will evolution shape the biological world 100 years from now or 100,000, is study and expand on network theory. And that is your answer for humans and quite possibly for beavers as well. Thank you. Very interesting question. Glad to have answered that perfectly. Next, we have Greg Lynn. Isn't that a good stereo audio? Anyway, owner Greg Lynn Forum Office, also the Ordnungslichter University Professor of Architecture. I haven't had too many architects in this group of questions. University of Applied Arts Vienna, Studio Professor, UCLA School of Arts and Architecture. Greg Lynn's last question is, can we train machines to design and construct a humane and vibrant built environment for us? Excuse me. One more time. Can we train machines to design and construct a humane and vibrant built environment for us? And let me see if this... Yeah. Oh, that fits perfectly. Man, it's so good. Well, let's break this frickin' thing apart. Let's break the question apart. Is there such a thing as a humane and vibrant environment for us? When he says us, I'm just saying humans. Saying humans, I'm going to limit that to humans kind of as we conceive of them now. Saying they're still sexually reproducing and arms and legs and gonads and shit. A human and vibrant environment. Humane. What the hell is humane? The thing is, there's so much trapped in these simple words like equitable, humane, moral. I mean, it brings up the fact that I have a minor in philosophy. But there's like so much trapped in each one of these words that requires unpacking, which is great. I mean, these are the last questions. These are ridiculously difficult questions, but by saying a humane environment, you're kind of assuming that we know what humane is, that we can decide on what humane is. I kind of feel like, to the extent that we just differ, that humanity just differs in some ways about our concepts of collectivism versus individualism, our orientation towards the primary thing being truth versus the primary thing being equality. I was having a conversation with a friend of mine, and he's like, yeah, the search for truth is obviously the most important thing there is. And I said, I get it, and I feel the same way, but I think some people don't feel that way. They're just like, if you had to press them, they would be like, no, it's more important that we design something that's humane or human or better Even if that gets in the way of the search for truth or the search for whatever. I think just people are orientated differently. And so to say humane is to kind of, I feel like it's to kind of skirt past the idea of humans are different. And that's part of our strength and part of our wonderful ability is that we can look at, you know, the idea that we could look at a concept like humane and envision a humane society and envision it differently is a big strength and a big weakness. I think it's a greater strength because if we all felt the same way, we could just go down. We're searching a landscape. We need to search the landscape. If we all decide this is the landscape, then that leads us to two problems. One, we could be going down a landscape which is a black hole and we're just dead. That's a big problem. Two, we could find the local optimum and never find a higher optimum because we're all going the same way. So we need that differentiation, that variation, but that at the same time as we need that doesn't let us have a one definition for what humane is. So how are we going to design machines to design something which we can't agree on? They would have to design an environment that was big enough for humans to be able to have their own definitions of what humane is. I was thinking about intelligence and AI and stuff like that, and I was at a bar like a year ago or something like that, and I was like, I just had these thoughts, and I'm like, oh, they're gonna do this, and they're gonna do this, and I was like, AI is just gonna like, it's gonna be like a new version of Congress or something, because we won't be able to define a best way because we won't be able to really interpret the results that we'll get out of an AI forecast for this is how you need to do things. So we'll have to like have competing AIs that are competing against each other, and it's like, literally we're just going to reinvent. We're going to reinvent all the systems that we've already invented in some way. I swear to God, that's what's going to happen. I think it's a feature, not a bug, that not all humans have the same definition for what humane is. So can we train machines to design and construct a humane environment for us? How us do you want to be? I think we'd be much more likely to be able to train a machine to build an environment for me, and then maybe me and my wonderful girlfriend who is there. But I almost feel like if you're trying for larger and larger numbers of people, n equals a million, n equals a billion, n equals whatever, you're probably going to run into, is it Gödel, whatever, is the incompleteness theorem. I feel like AI is going to run into that same thing too, and it's just going to have to make the kind of compromises that maybe a level of two of compromises higher or less constrictive than we have. So they might get much more free, and maybe they'll get free and vibrant to the fact that that'll be good enough for humanity, but they won't be. We will be constrained by our differentiation, and our differentiation is something we don't want to screw with. Also, what is an environment? Like we're gonna train machines. Like what kind of environment? Like, are they gonna build a better Kansas? Are they going to build a virtual reality that we can all? I very much feel like, although virtual realities are going to allow us to break free of a lot of the constraints, a lot of the the issues that we have, I think they're also social systems built in virtual realities will likely remanifest certain types of constraints, controls, hierarchies, a lot of the things that we decry, and we're calling bugs in our system. They're just going to be recapitulated, remanifested in other systems, and there'll be features, and we'll pay extra. Also, I don't even think reviewing machines is kind of like as like a binary. Like there's humans and then there's machines, and I think our interaction with what we're calling machines will be so much more integrated and almost on an organic level that we don't even have the type of relationship to these things that will be adjuncts to ourselves, that will even really view them as machines necessarily. They'll just be I think we'll call them friends. I think we will just kind of like consider them friends, helpful. I just think that as these things become more useful, we will be less likely to think of them as tools, which is a strange, ironical thing. But I think maybe we'll be more likely to just view them as friendly helpers, like the Microsoft 95, the paperclip guy or whatever. Like he was 100 years ahead of his time. That's what we're gonna. Anyway, so Greg Lynn, can we train machines to design and construct a humane and vibrant built environment for us? We are not going to think of them as machines. We're going to think of them as the paperclip guy on the Microsoft Windows. And it's going to depend on who we're saying us is. The bigger amount of us, the more we're going to have to build in larger and larger ideas of what humane is. Which is going to make it, kind of by definition, less optimized for an individual, but more optimized for a group. And so we're going to run into the kind of fundamental constraints that you run into just, me versus us. And as long as we differ, and we should differ, we're going to have different definitions. So maybe you almost have to think of an environment as somehow being dynamic between the me and the us. I don't even really know what I'm trying to say, but maybe there's some way to conceptualize an environment as dynamically consisting of one entity, agent, whatever, and then being able to expand accordion-like, and the rules and the constraints or whatever expand as that constrains. So it's almost like if you've got me in a room, the rules look like this. If you've got me and two friends in the room, the rules look a little bit like this. If you've got me and 1,000 people in the room, the rules look a little bit different. So the N is the number of people is a variable that determines or that constructs what the environment looks like. I'm not sure how to conceptualize that any further, so I'll just leave it at there. You dynamically construct an environment based on the participants in the environment and the rule set and the constraints and everything there. Okay, so Greg Lynn, thank you for that question. Next, we have Ziad. I hope I'm pronouncing this correctly. Ziad Marar. What an interesting name. Ziad Marar, president of Global Publishing at Sage, author of Judged, The Value of Being Misunderstood. And Ziad's last question is, how will people focus more on forming the right question before rushing headlong towards the answer? Man, this was actually this is actually something I was just thinking about last night when I couldn't sleep. I was thinking about people needing to be less focused on just having an answer and more focused on finding better ways to ask the questions. There's so much too bound up in this is the way this is, when it's like how should I think about this thing in different ways? And of course, the reason we don't do that too much is like for most of our evolutionary history, if we're thinking about 9 different ways, let me find 17 different ways to peel this banana. I want to get killed by somebody else that wants the banana. I mean, so pondering and pontificating, philosophizing, all that kind of stuff is kind of a it's an intellectual luxury that I think society has, and then the increase in material goods and all that kind of stuff has made more and more of us able to do that, which is good. Maybe. But it's my eye's gonna fall off. I just gave my eyeball COVID. How will people focus more and more on, excuse me, on forming the right question before rushing headlong towards the answer? I like to put this little tick or something in my own mind, and sometimes in other people's mind too, is this like something like, do you have answers, or do answers have you? Do you have these ideas, or do those ideas have you? And it's kind of a way to maybe just flip it around a little bit to conceptually say, wait a second, maybe humans are just ideas' way of propagating themselves. I mean, it's just flip it a little bit, just try not have your identity being so bound up in this is what I believe, because that can kind of shackle you. So I'm not answering the question, I'm just giving some flavor to it. I'm answering it a little bit because he's asking how. How is, maybe you flip it around and you say, do you have ideas, or do ideas have you? That's one way of flipping it around, making people, well, that actually goes back to some of this goes back to my thoughts about I tongue-in-cheek said, I put this thing where I said I fixed postmodernism, and then I was like saying ideologies make great lenses but lousy mirrors, which is one way, if people can conceptualize that, perhaps say, like, it's like, I am a Catholic. Well, flip that around a little bit and just say, a Catholic would think of this thing like this. So it's not defining your identity, it's using ideologies like tools in a toolkit to think of something. But it's the trick of the trick of not defining yourself by a particular ideology. But maybe you define yourself by this buffet of ideologies. But I think we kind of have to learn that, because what if we learned in the last 10 years or whatever is that these old ways of like, this is how I can define myself, and this is how this is the way the world looks, and I can just read the New York Times and that'll give me an answer on how the world looks. It's like, no frickin' way. Those That isn't even that's not the cave wall. The cave wall doesn't look like that anymore. Look at this from an economic perspective. Look at it from a what is the advantage to having the answer right now, even if it's wrong? If we have an answer, then we can proceed with going somewhere and making something out of that, and that's done. And so it's about probably opportunity costs for having an answer and going forward versus further pontificating. I don't want to sound elitist. I'd rather just be elitist. There's part of me that's thinking that I'm not sure that it's necessary for all of us to spend that much time on forming the right question. It's certainly important for some of us for that. I'm just thinking of like, I don't want to be too pessimistic, but I was thinking about this. Was it Seneca, the elder, or something like that? One of the Greeks. He was like, 3,000 years ago. He said religion has always been viewed by the common person as true, by the wise as false, and by the rulers as useful. And he figured that out like 3,000 years ago, close to 3,000 years, 2,500 years ago. And that statement rings like there's so much truth, there's so much compacted intelligence in that statement that it should have just blown away like our superficial religious constructs and all that stuff. But it hasn't. Like that idea has not vitiated all of our, it's just not spread like wildfire through all of our epistemological pursuits. And so I'm just not sure, and it sounds so elitist in a way that maybe we just need a certain amount of people more focused on working on the questions, and the rest of, and then it just filters down into the answers, because that isn't the way I want to think about humanity. But I think there may be something to that. But if you want to make a big wholesale change, you've got the costs for having an incomplete or wrong answer need to be higher, and the costs for pondering, for investigation, for skepticism need to be lower. So if that's the goal, then you have an environment where I'm envisioning like a fitness landscape, and it's like you're punished for taking a step too quickly. You're rewarded for taking a step in the right direction. But haste does make waste. Haste makes I don't think. I mean, laying out the landscape there of yes, you've got to lower the cost of pontification, of philosophizing, of asking the questions. You've got to raise the cost of a bad, quick answer. That's how to do it. At the same time, I don't know that environment is I think that's a fragile environment or a fragile way to. It's a fragile system. I don't know how to explain this correctly. I kind of feel like if we all went towards more pontification and philosophizing and understanding before we made a move, that system would be hacked by quick movers. That system wouldn't be evolutionary stable. I think there is probably a reason which is deeper than just the particulars of human evolution why the philosophers have only been a tiny percent of humanity. And that sounds so I don't like saying those words. I'll tell you what you do. I tell you what you need to do. You need to lower. You need to get rid of. If people don't have to worry about getting. If people don't have to worry about getting food, getting energy, getting housing, getting all that shit, you lower. Then you lower the costs for pontificating. Because you're not going to get eaten up by the lion if you're sitting there pondering how to. So that's the thing. Okay, you want to do that, then you just you decrease the costs for stalling, for pontificating down to zero. So we need full on nuclear fusion. We need free energy. We need free resources. We need free everything. We have to turn all of civilization and living to be as easy as having your own web page. Having your own life has got to be as easy as just having your own web page. And then you're not going to die because you sat there for 13 hours and just thought of how many ways is there to conceptualize a pencil, because you still got food either way, and you don't so basically no one needs whenever no one needs to have a job anymore, then there's your nirvana. In the meantime, we're gonna have a division of resources, of cognitive resources and stuff. So as we head towards everybody having whatever they need, that this question will answer itself. So Thank you, Ziad Marar, for that question. That very, very interesting question. And I'm going to take a moment because my brain tired. I shall be back. We're back. Saving the world. That was Ziad Marar, and we are on to the next one, which is Gary Marcus, professor of psychology, director at the NYU, which is not far from NYME. And also they have an incredible hockey team there. Director, NYU Center for Language and Music, and author of Guitar Zero. Gary Marcus's last question is, why are humans still so much more flexible in their thinking and everyday reasoning than machines? Oh, that fit perfectly right there. Why are humans still so much flexible in their thinking and everyday reasoning than machines? Well, part of it's that we have a 4 billion year head start. Might be some of it. I mean, I like that the question is asked this way, because a lot of times you would ask the question like, why haven't machines developed I like the fact that the question is posed in such a way that we're not giving too much credit to where AI is right now, and where because it can do some crazy shit. It can beat us at chess. It can beat us at whatever. It just can't beat us at everything at the moment. Well, flexible in their thinking. Well, let's talk about inputs. Let's talk about interfaces. The most complex, smart AI systems are still they're still thinking in terms of unit ideology or one game, or they tend to be trying to think about how to do one thing, where humans have to do several different things in order to get by, in order to survive. It's not just we've got to be able to walk, we've got to be able to talk, we've got to be able to make a mental representation of the world in our heads in order to think about where we should walk and talk. I mean, there's so many different interfaces coming in, and there's the complexity of that, and it probably has something to do with degrees of freedom, and so we haven't even gotten close to building in the complexity, because the landscape of knowledge that we've built into computer systems is so thin and so unidirectional or univariate relative to all the different ways of thinking and all the different types of interfaces too. You think about how sounds hit you and how they might affect how they might affect you, how they might affect your. You have no idea. Sounds might affect your appetite. Certainly, sight affects your appetite, right? I mean, you can see something and be like, oh, well, it's amazing. So the complexity of maybe the degrees of freedoms that could be conceptualized in some way by the interfaces that we have in reality are not mirrored at all in a machine's conceptualization of reality. And even if you give a machine unsupervised data or whatever with It may be that flexibility is a function or arises out of a conceptualization of purpose, which we don't know how to give machines a multi-layered, faceted version of purpose. We can give it like, win at chess. Also, it may be that the flexibility, what Gary Marcus you're calling flexibility, has to do with intercranial competition for resources. And we're naming that flexibility because we've got 19 different things pinging at us, and we're calling it flexibility just because that's what we're going to call it, when it really is just kind of a proxy for there's a competition for resources up here, and the winner varies, and we're calling that complexity, whereas it's you could almost look at it as like a congress or a round table of AI systems that are all looking at different slices of the world through their own interfaces, and then there's some type of mediation layer that's on top of this that's saying, okay, well this one's now and this one's now, and that's kind of like maybe the human level of complexity, where we're kind of mediating different systems that are all saying, okay, look at me, look at me, look at me, whereas an AI system in and of itself is just that one layer. Reminds me of the phenomenal put down of a person's acting ability by I think it was Bradley Whitford, called Will Bailey. I forget on West Wing. Anyway, he called his acting a one-layer cake, which is just, it's pretty good. It's just like, it's just boom. And maybe you could conceive of kind of like humanity as like a hierarchy of AI, of different AI systems that are pancaked on top of one another and taking different inputs, and it's kind of a struggle to get to the hierarchy. And the top of the hierarchy is what I call me or whatever, but maybe it's that competition of different types of kind of like systems and for resources that creates what we see as flexibility. Maybe it doesn't really flexibility. Maybe it's just we're calling it flexibility, but it's just it's the competition for different resources, and our view of it looks like complexity. Of course I do. I'm 112 for 112. I'm not going to get this one wrong. That's one idea. Again, it could just be data, just be different data sets. Different data sets that are actually I wonder if it even has something to do with the translation of does the translation of an optic nerve input of photons and whatever, how does that translate into an actionable thing, an actionable whatever, versus sonic waves hitting the inner eardrum being translated into whatever, versus the taste on the tongue wondering if there's some kind of flexibility that arises out of the translation of that, which kind of becomes its own thing. I don't know if I'm explaining this very well. I'm probably not explaining it very well because I don't understand what I'm thinking very well. Another simple answer is machines are more flexible because we're programming the machines and we don't know how we think. I mean, we have some ground level blueprints of like synapses and neurons and weighted stuff, and it's like, you know, fitting a curve and stuff, but like we don't know, you know, how the cathedrals of thought get built out of those bricks. You know, and there may be a lot of tricks in the way the bricks are used, are creating another level of complexity where we're just looking at bricks, brick. Flexible also could just be flexible could be a proxy for change my mind. And we're probably not building machines to change their minds. I mean, I get in at low-level AI stuff, we're getting to train them that'll change their minds in a certain way, but maybe there's a fundamental changing of the mind at a larger level, which does not arise from just that lower level bricks of, you know, finding the gradient descent and all that kind of stuff, and maybe there are supernuminous, doesn't even make sense. Maybe there's higher ways of kind of like going back, where all the back propagation and stuff doesn't encapsulate that thing. Also, I'll just break it back. We've got 4 billion years to freaking figure this shit out. There's so much built. You know, I don't know how you extract the levels of complexity and hierarchical levels of human thought, but it has to at some point probably go down to a cellular level and below that. And I don't know how many, you know, how much complexity you're building into machines, but it's not, I don't think it's even anywhere near that level, even though you can do raw computation, maybe faster than a certain set of synapses or something like that. But the synapses are built on other stuff, which is built on other stuff, which is built on other stuff, and then the synapses get, you know, translated and stuff like that. So it's like, we're comparing a simple metric like horsepower with, you know, where, you know, you talk about like a complex AI system with 5 petaflops of blah 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 versus an average human brain. It's like we're saying, oh, the computer's got so much more horsepower. Yeah, but it's not. It doesn't have the ecosystem in which to fully empower that horsepower. You know, it's you know, You put the thing in a damn grocery cart. All it's going to do is just do this, you know? You need to put it in a vehicle that can really has multiple ways of interrogating the landscape of interest, which is, let's just say that's the landscape of interest. And you've got a 5,000 horsepower, jet powered whatever, but it's in flatland, and the human brain is interfacing in non-flatland. Also, it could be a fundamental misconception of how we're flexibility may be misconceived. It could just be faulty. we're just so trained to look at it as flexibility and as like, oh, we'll just do that. Well, it's just like, no, that's actually, we might think of it in 100 years as like, no, that's not good. It's just the, you know, the perspective from which we're reviewing it from made us think that it was flexibility, and actually it was just like wrong 9 times. I mean, like almost every other question on this thing too, you have to, how do you define flexibility? Which is what I was getting to in my 30 seconds ago. Also, everyday reasoning. Everyday reasoning. Humans have a certain natural clocks which they need to adhere to. You know, whatever you gotta do, you gotta eat every so while. You gotta do these things on a cyclical basis, because otherwise nothing else makes sense. You might have to build some of those constraints into your AI systems to make them think at a certain level that we do. It's like, or if we're kind of on this wave of like, you just need to do things. You might have to build more constraints not just into the data, but into the constraints of your, what would you call that? Your decision, you might have to build some artificial constraints into machines that will cause them to be flexible in the way that humans are, because maybe those type of constraints build what we call creativity and flexibility. Maybe it's like art. It's like, the constraints are what makes it art. Flexibility might be the artistic, some of the artistic nature of thinking, and you have to build in constraints, not necessarily in the data, but in the ecosystem that the data is allowed to impact. Plus, we could just be looking at this from such an anthropomorphic level that humans aren't that much more flexible, and we're just thinking about the question the wrong way. everyday reasoning. I mean, it just assumes that there can't be an all-time reasoning. Like, oh, I have to come up with an answer in the next 6 hours or the next 10 minutes. That changes everything. Still, you put brute force AI power into that and you get deep mind or whatever that can play chess or go, whatever. But it can't decide whether or not it wants to play chess or go. How do humans decide whether they want to play chess or go to sleep or machines don't have the constraints that humans do. Constraints enable and enforce flexibility to work, to operate inside those constraints. You got to give machines more rules, not less. So, Gary Marcus, professor of psychology, that is your answer, and thank you very much. It's very interesting. Next, let's see how much more I got in me. I'm 113 for 113. John Markoff, who is a Pulitzer Prize winning reporter at the New York Times. That used to be a whatever. Pulitzer Prize winning reporter at the New York Times and author of Machines of Loving Grace. Well, that's a very interesting grouping of words there. And John Markoff's last question is, how will the world be changed when battery storage technology improves at the same exponential rate seen in computer chips? Okay. Okay. Well, one, I'm going to say that this is making the assumption that battery technology will improve at the same exponential rate seen in computer chips in recent decades, and I'm leery of that claim. John seems to think that that's going to happen. I'm kind of trying to conceptualize the limits of energy storage, and if we have some reason to believe that we are going to be able to improve those at a Moore's Law rate or better or something like that. I mean, he's saying this, so he seems to think that's true. I feel like we're going to bump up against either fundamental physics or close to fundamental physics quicker than we did with Moore's Law when it comes to energy storage. But I could be very wrong about that. Let's just assume he's right. So now we've got rising computational levels, and we've got incredibly rising energy levels, still, battery storage technology, you still got to get the energy from somewhere. So I don't know if it makes a huge difference, because you still got to get the energy from, oil, shale, wind, solar, nuclear. So that might be the bottleneck. Screw the bottleneck for a moment, and let's just say we've got our this thing, and because this battery now I can store 100 times as much in this battery, so it could either last for 3 weeks using it full time, or I can do an enormous amount more calculations I guess I'm thinking of this in terms of mobile dynamics, because I'm not thinking about battery storage technology in any type of fundamental change to the nature of our living, as it is not related to being able to have computational power mobily. He could be talking about, you put a battery in a windmill and it can store energy much more efficiently and much more better, and that could change things much more than I think just a better battery in a mobile thing would do. What am I not thinking of? I think that's a fundamental dichotomy there, is like, if you're considering a battery as something that can just store whatever type of, again, wind, solar, blah, 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 and we could get much more efficiency and much more, that I think would be a much bigger change than just having an iPhone that could last for 3 weeks with full. Here's the question: could that battery then allow for increased computational levels, where a cell phone could kind of act like a supercomputer? I think we would still run into like heat problems, and as long as we're still on this kind of mode of how we're doing stuff with integrated circuits and all that kind of stuff, I think we would still run into heat problems and start to run into quantum problems with chip size, regardless of battery storage. So I think the bigger if we could take the wind and all of a sudden it charges a battery, and it charges it, very well, and the battery doesn't leak power. Let's just take that thought, because that thought is more interesting than, for me anyway, than just like a incredibly strong battery on an iPhone. If that type of technology improved, that would change the world, because now we're talking about, we could get batteries to all over the world. Energy would no longer be a constraint and a resource that we have to fight for, or at least nearly as much as we do now, and we have to go to war for, and we need to political alliances and stuff like that. If energy just becomes like oxygen hopefully will be for the next, has been and will be. It's just there. If energy does that, that will, yes, that would fundamentally change a lot of aspects about the world. Actually goes back to the question I was talking about earlier, but it's just like, how do we get people to want to find the right questions to ask, and instead of just leaping to an answer? Well, you have to lower the cost. If you make energy free, you make so much stuff. If energy's fairly free, that means food is pretty much free. That means housing is incredibly inexpensive, because even the energy to build the stuff will be pretty cheap. So battery technology in that way would make us very bored, and we're going to have to find new ways to hate each other. Oh, it's so cynical. New ways to entertain ourselves through some level of competition. Put a shine on that. You ain't got no sheen on you. At that level, at the base, storage of energy, that could change a lot of things. Fundamentally change the economics of humanity. So if energy is free, then it will become air. How do we use the air? How do we use we'll forget about it, one. It will just become part of the landscape, part of the flatland. Take it as a given, build off of it. Not sure if I should give any more brilliant answers other than the ones I've already given, because I could write down the formula, I guess. I think battery writ large, where it can store any type of energy, and as a vehicle for, as like a replacement for coal plants and for whatever, that could change everything huge. I don't think better battery in an iPhone is going to make that much difference as compared to the big one. It's like, oh, I need battery's dead. Hold it up the wind. All right, I got energy now. Boom, we're good to go. Which in that case, the battery would never be dead. what do you need more energy for to build virtual worlds? Because the real world's already here, so it would supercharge our creation, destruction, population, evolution of virtual environments. For sure. Would capitalism be superfluous? I think so. Who would die quicker, Marx or Mills? So, John Markoff, the answer to your last question is the question is, how will the world be changed when battery storage technology improves at the same exponential rate seen in computer chips in recent decades? If you're talking about battery in the iPhone, I don't think it'll change that much, honestly. If you're talking about as base collection mechanisms similar to like coal plants and stuff like that, will change everything. Fundamental of economics will probably be changed, but I'm not going to give you the answer to that one because you've got to read my book. And yeah, so that's it. So thank you, John Markoff, for that interesting question. See if I got one more in me. Livio-Marletto. That's a pretty name. She's got to be, tell me she's Italian. Junior Research Fellow at Wolfson College and Postdoctoral Research Associate at the Materials. I'm going to get it right. I got to go back to the Junior Research Fellow at Wolfson College and Postdoctoral Research Associate at the Materials Department, University of Oxford, currently working with David Deutsch. Livio-Marletto's last question is the number of interesting questions finite or not? Oh, Christ. Well, interesting. What the hell is interesting? Mathematically interesting, mathematically. What's beneath mathematics? Has anybody asked that question? Could we even conceptualize of something being beneath mathematics? What the hell would that be? Isn't all of logic bound up in mathematics? What could be beneath mathematics? I don't know. Just something I was thinking about. Maybe there's something beneath mathematics. Is the number of interesting questions finite or not? Who's asking? Let's define interesting. Let's define interesting as a question to which the answer, if it can be known, may have an impact on an agent. I keep going back to like a pixel on a fitness landscape, so you can go here, something like that. Think about a question. An interesting question would be a question in which the answer to that could inform a little pixel, a little tree of life thing going to one direction or the other direction of staying there. It could inform that in a way that impacts its viability, its agency, its survivability, whatever. So, from that perspective, as a pixel, wondering whether or not should I stay or should I go? How many questions can I answer that will yield an answer which will inform my should I stay or should I go? If the number is infinite, aren't you kind of running into some version of incompleteness theorem there? The number is infinite. And we'll always have a need for philosophers. The number is finite. It doesn't make any sense either. Keep getting hung about that word interesting. I feel like interesting has a relationship to dimensionality or degrees of freedom, and maybe bounded by so we're thinking about it in another way, like, okay, now you've got your pixel in a landscape, but what about now if the pixel has a relationship to everywhere else in the landscape? It has a history with the rest of the landscape. From that perspective, I'm thinking it almost has to be finite unless the landscape itself is infinite. Is that really just a different way of asking, are the number of things infinite? Even if the number of things are infinite, that doesn't necessarily mean that the number of interesting questions you can ask about those things are infinite. And maybe Claude Shannon still comes into play here, and, even though the amount of computational questions you can ask about a car going down the road at 60 miles an hour and the internal combustion engine and the all the relationships between at all the different levels, there's potentially an infinite amount of data there, or whatever. There's only so many questions you can ask about the car. How fast is it going? Is it accelerating? How much fuel is left? What are the... There may be... Is there an infinite amount of questions and a finite amount of interesting questions? It's probably another way to phrase that. Interesting is in the eye of the beholder. How many different ways can something be beautiful or ugly? Well, my last video, you're going to get my doing my Auguste Rodin. Is that who it is? It's amazing. Let me finish this off here then. Wow, okay. Is the number of interesting questions finite or not? Livio-Marletto, beautiful name. The answer to your last question, which is the number of interesting questions finite or not? The number of interesting questions is finite to the system in question, but infinite to an agent in the system. Yeah, I'm going to stick to that. Finite for the system, infinite for us. Thank you, Livio-Marletto. I hope I'm pronouncing that close. Either way, it's wonderfully sonorous. And I'm jealous that you are working with Double D. Anyway, thank you for the question, and we will see you on the flip side. Thanks again.